All right, Bible and Daily Lifers. We are going through the New Testament in a year, and we are in the book of Acts, chapter 23. So we're making some great progress. We're starting to move towards going through half of the New Testament so far this year. So we are in chapter 23 of Acts. Well, you need a little background to understand what's going on here. In chapter 20, the Apostle Paul met with the Ephesian elders on a beach. And he said, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I know that you'll never see my face again. And he gave them some charges, the things they were supposed to do, watch over the flock. He said, teach the word. He said, I taught the whole word to you, so therefore you should be teaching the whole word. He knew that persecution would be visiting him wherever he went. And so he's on his way to Jerusalem, and they send him on his way, and they're all crying and hugging, and Paul goes on his way. He ends up in Jerusalem. When he's in Jerusalem, some of the Jewish leaders there see him with Trophimus, and Trophimus is a Gentile, and they thought that he was bringing Trophimus into the temple, and so they're charging him with desecrating the temple by deliberately bringing a Gentile in there, and the thing goes into an uproar, and the city goes into an uproar. And then the Apostle Paul, as this crowd is going into an uproar, the Roman commander lets him speak to them. And he speaks to them, and as he begins to speak with them, he starts to share his testimony, starts to share his story. You have a story, I have a story. We have a testimony. I hope you have a testimony. It might be that you don't have a testimony yet, that you're still exploring Jesus. So I'd say surrender to Jesus and get yourself a testimony. Get yourself a story of your Jesus story. So the Apostle Paul, he starts to tell his story. And as he's telling it, they're all interested. They're all listening, the big crowd. And then he said God told him to go to the Gentiles, and the crowd goes crazy because they're like, no way that God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, would tell you to go to Gentiles. That's awful. That's blasphemous. And so they want to kill him. They want to get rid of him because he said he was going to the Gentiles. So the Roman commander finds out that he's a Roman citizen. He was going to flog him, and now he's like, oh no, I can't flog the guy. The guy's a Roman citizen. I could lose my life for flogging this guy unjustly. So he calls together, the Roman commander calls together all of the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, which is sort of like the big city council of the city, the religious leaders. He calls them all together, and he's like, why are we against this guy? I need to find out what's going on. So that's where we pick up. And Paul before the Sanhedrin, the Roman commander, all the religious leaders. Here's what happens. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and he said, my brothers, I love that because he's seeing them as equals. He said, I have fulfilled my duty to God with a clear conscience. At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Wow. Punch him in the mouth because he said he was serving God with a clear conscience. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. What is this? Those standing near Paul said, how dare you insult God's high priest? And Paul said, brothers, I didn't realize he was a high priest. For it is written, don't speak evil about the ruler of your people. Now, it's kind of interesting that Paul couldn't recognize he was the high priest because he probably would have been dressed up like the high priest, which might give credence to the idea that some people think that the Apostle Paul had some kind of an eye disease. Why do they think that? Because in the book of Galatians, he said he stopped in Galatia because of an illness, and then he ends up saying, you would have poked out your own eyes for me if you could. That's the kind of people you were. So, maybe he had bad eyes. And in another place he says, see with what large letters I write. So maybe, they assume he couldn't see. So it's possible that this adds to that. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and others Pharisees, because the Sadducees did not believe in afterlife or the resurrection, but the Pharisees did believe in afterlife and the resurrection. So he knew that both of those groups were in the room, those theological schools. And he called out in the Sanhedrin, and he said, brothers, I'm a Pharisee, a descendant of Pharisees. So, this is my heritage too. And he said, I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. When he said this, a dispute broke out before the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Boy, he knew how to get them going, and he brought up the resurrection, and then they start arguing about the resurrection. Because the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, and that there is neither angels or spirits, but the Pharisees believe in all of these things. Well, there was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and they argued vigorously. We don't find anything wrong with this man. Right, because he's on their side theologically, at least with the supernatural things. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? And the dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces, and he ordered the troops to go down and take him away by force and bring him to the barracks. The following night the Lord stood near Paul, and he said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you must testify about me in Rome." So Jesus tells him he's going to go to Rome and share his testimony there. Well, the next morning some Jews formed a conspiracy, and they bound themselves with an oath to not eat or drink until they had killed Paul. So religious leaders violently fighting each other, trying to kill Paul. Religion is folly. Religion is crazy. Nothing crazy about following Jesus. That's just the right thing to do. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. And they went to the chief priests and the elders, and they said, "We've taken a solemn oath. We won't eat anything until we've killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information, and we're ready to kill him when he gets here." So go ask the commander, say, bring him so we can, get some more information, and when he's on the way, we'll be hiding and we'll kill him. But when the son of Paul's sister, would have been his nephew, right, heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and he told Paul. And Paul called one of the centurions. He said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. And the centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and he said, "What is it? What are you trying to tell me?" He said, "Some of the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting to ambush him. And they've taken an oath to not eat or drink until they've killed him, and they're ready now and waiting for you to consent to their request." And the commander dismissed the young man with the warning, "Don't tell anybody that you reported this to me." Then he called together 2 of his centurions, so 200 men. And he ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearsmen, to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to the governor Felix." And he wrote this letter. He said, "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they're about to kill him. But I came with my troops and rescued him, for I learned that he's a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought them to the Sanhedrin. I found the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there's no charge against him that deserves death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot against him to kill him, I sent him to you at once. I ordered his accusers to present their case against you." So he goes to Caesarea from Jerusalem. He goes to Caesarea by the sea. They travel there at night, 200 soldiers protecting him, 70 horsemen. So the soldiers carried it out, and they took Paul during the night as far as Antipatris, and the next day they let the cavalry go with him, and they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived at Caesarea, they delivered the letter, handed Paul over. The governor read the letter and asked what province it was from, learning it was from Cilicia. And he said, "I hear your case when your accusers get here," and he ordered Paul to be kept under guard in Herod's palace. So now Paul's going to get to share his testimony now with Felix, the governor and the ruler in Caesarea. So he's going from governor to governor. He's going from important person to important person. He's sharing his testimony all over Rome right now. God is opening up incredible opportunities for him to share his testimony, to share the message of salvation, to share the message of the resurrection. And I think God will open up doors for us too. So God, I pray that you'd open up doors for us to share the story, our story, about how you resurrected us, about how you saved us, And we ask that you do that, Lord, with friends and family and kings and princes and who else knows who. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you. May the Lord give you peace and grace and mercy. Hey, love you guys.